All right, guys. So we've been talking about what's going on in Kansas, and we know that it's just an absolute wreck, right? We talked about it. Kansas at this point has been nicknamed Bleeding Kansas. We've got two governments working simultaneously and independently in Kansas, one pro-slavery and one anti-slavery. So both trying to enforce laws and pass laws. So it's just basically a hot mess in Kansas. So if you remember, I said Lecompton is the city in Kansas where the pro-slavery government is working and where they are meeting. So in 1857, they decided to hold another election. So if you remember, we said that they did a whole investigation into how exactly they were going to be able to hold a new election and it be free. So they listed all these things they were going to do. They were going to have the census. They were going to get new judges. They were going to put soldiers at all the polling places. So they have this new election. Once again, it gets rigged, and it doesn't apparently matter what precautions they take. Everything ends up corrupt in Kansas. So once again, a pro-slavery delegation is elected to Congress. So the Congress in Lecompton is now basically still officially a pro-slavery government. So now they can start working on the state constitution. If you remember, I've said that is part of the path to statehood. They have to write a state constitution. When they write their state constitution, they submit it with their statehood application to Congress. Congress reads the constitution. If they like it, they'll vote on it and they'll pass it and they'll become a state. If not, it will fail in Congress in D.C. and it will get sent back to Kansas, and Kansas will have to write a new constitution, and they won't be able to become a state quite yet. So while the government in Lecompton starts working on the state constitution, the anti-slavery people are like, no, this is absolutely ridiculous. We need to hold another election, this time with even more supervision. So they hold one more election in October, and this time, with all of the extra supervision and security that they have, they manage to elect a lot of anti-slavery people. And the Free Soilers, if you remember them, the anti-slavery party, they are able to gain a majority in both houses of Congress in Kansas. So we've got a majority of anti-slavery people in the House of Representatives as well as the Senate in the territorial legislature there in Kansas. So so that new anti-slavery government is working on their constitution. So the pro-slavery delegates realize that voters are never going to approve a pro-slavery constitution if they put it to a vote now, because before they can send the constitution to D.C., it has to be approved by the people living in Kansas. And under the supervised election, who won? The anti-slavery people won. So that means that there must be more anti-slavery people living in Kansas than there are pro-slavery people when they're not having a rigged election. So the pro-slavery people know that they don't have the true majority in Kansas, but that's not stopping them. So they have this constitution that's pro-slavery. We'll call it the Lecompton Constitution. That'll be easy to remember because Lecompton's pro-slavery. So they've got this Lecompton Constitution that is pro-slavery, and they don't want to put it to a vote to the citizens of Kansas just yet, because they want to make sure that whatever they put up, they'll be able to get to a vote. So instead of submitting the whole Constitution, they submit a small measure that is very wordy and strangely written that will either allow slavery or not. So they slide this in a separate election, and it ends up passing, and they say, okay, that's official then, and it's just a very sneaky way that they've gone about this. So all of the Northerners and the anti-slavery people are absolutely outraged that they've done this. Stephen Douglas even says that they're making a mockery of popular sovereignty, that they're perverting the way the system's meant to work. Once again, there's another brawl in Congress. This one, actually 50 people are fighting in Congress, like all one fight full of 50 congressmen just punching each other. One guy named John Potter, who was a representative from Wisconsin, ripped the toupee off of a guy, William Barksdale from Mississippi, and he shouted, "I've scalped him," when he ripped his toupee off. So he literally snatched this dude's wig. I mean, it's getting out of control at this point. It's getting out of control, as if it wasn't before. So Free Soilers now, pissed off at what the pro-slavery people have done with the Lecompton Constitution, refuse to participate in the election because they're saying that it's sneaky. Well, if the Free Soilers aren't participating, clearly it's not going to be difficult for the Constitution to be passed in Congress, so it passes. So in January of 1858, the Free Soilers hold their own election, and they reject the proposal and the whole Constitution. But this is the second vote, and which one's legal, the first one that they protested against, or the second one that they held without actually needing to. So a bunch of Southerners say, if Congress accepts the second vote instead of the first one, we're going to secede, for the millionth time. They're threatening to secede. So it's up to James Buchanan to decide which one is legal. And if you remember, he's a dingus. So he takes the Lecompton Constitution and submits it to Congress. And he says, this is it. This is the Constitution that Kansas has submitted for a vote. And he submits a formal request to Congress that they submit Kansas to the Union as a slave state. It gets approved in the Senate, but it does not get approved in the House. So in May, Congress decides that they will make Kansas vote on this Constitution one more time. They've had like a bajillion elections about this thing, and they're like, all right, one more vote. If it passes, Kansas is going to be admitted as a slave state. If it fails, then Kansas will be denied statehood, and they can't apply again until their population reaches 90,000 people. So they hold this new election in August under strict supervision, and the voters overwhelmingly reject the Constitution, and the Lecompton Constitution fails. So the overall impact of this is that finally this Kansas nonsense is put to rest. Kansas is not going to be admitted to the Union as a slave state. It is not going to happen. But it deepens the division even more between North and South here. It deepens the division in the Democratic Party. Stephen Douglas now has officially split and totally separated himself from the president, from James Buchanan, weakening James Buchanan's political power because Stephen Douglas is getting more political power here. And the Southerners start thinking now that if they threaten to secede, that they're just going to get their way all the time. So the whole thing is just setting some really bad precedents here. So let's talk a little bit more about John Brown. We talked about John Brown previously, if you remember the Pottawatomie Massacre, right? He's the crazy abolitionist who pulled all of those pro-slavery people down to the creek and hacked them to death with broadswords. That's this dude. So John Brown is, now moving on to bigger and better things, and he has a plan to ignite a slave rebellion, a big, huge slave insurrection. Insurrection's another word for like a rebellion or something like that. And he has this plan to do this, and it all revolves around a town in what at that time was Virginia, because West Virginia and Virginia had not separated yet. So it was all Virginia back then. Today Harper's Ferry is in West Virginia, but all of this he had planned out to happen in a place called Harper's Ferry. So John Brown rents a small farmhouse about 4 miles north of Harper's Ferry under a fake name. Actually, he rents it under Isaac Smith. I don't think that had he done it under his real name that would have been suspicious, because as we said before, John Brown is not exactly a unique name. But he rents this cabin and farmhouse, 2 buildings that they're going to serve. They're later on going to be serve sort of as his like headquarters for the whole thing. He rents this under a fake name. So this facility is going to serve as the barracks, arsenal, supply depot, mess hall, debate club, and home for all of the people that are going to be involved in planning and getting going this new slave rebellion. So they would never go out during the daytime. They only went out at nighttime because John Brown didn't want to alert the neighbors. He wanted to be, as cause as little suspicion as possible. So he came with a group of 21 men total, 16 white guys, 3 free blacks, 1 freed slave, and 1 fugitive slave. So we've got several people here, risking their own freedom and everything. So Northern abolition groups sponsored John Brown in this plan, and they send him money and weapons. He actually ends up with a total of 100,000 muskets and rifles. So the man has got a fairly large supply of weapons here, and he tries to recruit some more abolitionists to join his cause. He even actually talks to Frederick Douglass and tries to get Frederick Douglass involved. And he's like, "Hey, Fred, I'm about to have a slave rebellion. Are you trying to get in on this?" And Frederick Douglass is like, "Heck no, I don't want in on this. This is a suicide mission. You have lost your mind, sir. I'm not about to get myself killed or arrested or anything like that. No, I do not want to be involved in this, and I suggest that you do not get involved in it either, because what you're going to end up doing is turning the whole country against all of us, and there's no way that you're going to make it out alive." And John Brown's like, "Nah, you're crazy. I got this." And he sets out on his plan. So this is what John Brown's plan is exactly. So the plan is that this is night by night plan. Night one, he plans to free about 200 to 500 slaves by going onto the plantations and the farms and setting all of these slaves free, getting them to go with him. And he thought that he knew that he would have some people against him, but he thought it would be about even, that as many people as he had trying to stop him, he would have about that as many people with him. And he thought that the militia in that area, in the Virginia area, would be no big deal to deal with. He thought that they would be fine and that he would have enough people to help him out. So after he had gathered about 200 to 500 slaves, he was going to send out agents sort of working for him to other nearby plantations to rally more slaves and bring them in. He would hold Harper's Ferry. He would take over Harper's Ferry for a few days after he had gotten freed all these slaves and everything, and he had enough people to sort of basically be the new army there with all of this 100,000 weapon arsenal that he has. He's going to hold Harper's Ferry for a few days, and then he's going to start moving south. And as he moves south, he will begin to free more and more slaves and pick up more and more supplies along the way. His plan is to follow the Appalachian Mountains south into Tennessee and then down through Alabama. So to do this, he has got to have some military training for those 21 guys that he brought with him. So he hires a guy named Hugh Forbes. He pays Hugh Forbes $600 to be his drill master. And unfortunately for John Brown, he doesn't get along with him. They argue a lot over strategy and money. Hugh Forbes is not even American. He's from Europe, and he wants to get paid more because he wants to bring his own family over from Europe. And John Brown says, "No, I've already paid you this much, is what we agreed on. I can't afford to pay you anymore. This is what it is." So Hugh Forbes starts writing letters to all of Brown's investors. So all of these people who have given John Brown money to make this happen, all those abolition groups and stuff, saying, that, he's not going to do this unless John Brown gives him more money, unless they give him more money. This is sort of, John Brown is kind of nuts, but he's trying to act like a professional, right? And this is a very unprofessional thing to do, to have some random crazy dude from Europe writing to all your financial backers demanding more money. So now John Brown is looking like he doesn't actually have his act together, and all of these northern abolition groups are like, "Hey man, what's going on?" And to make matters worse, in the process of writing these letters, Hugh Forbes actually exposes parts of the plan. And this plan is supposed to be top secret, right? The less people that know about it, the better. So then John Brown has to leave leave Virginia, go back to Kansas and back to the places where these abolition groups are supporting him to, talk to him, calm him down, re-secure that support, and discredit Forbes and, tell him, that he's crazy and that they're not dealing with anymore. This unfortunately cost him a lot of valuable time and a lot of momentum. And by the time the raid happens, like 80 people know about it ahead of time, and that's way too many people. One of those people who knew about it ahead of time was a guy named David Gue, Gue. He was a Quaker from Iowa, and he found out about the raid, and he's like, "Wow, I don't like slavery, but I don't want these guys to get killed. I don't support what this. I feel like they're going to end up getting themselves killed. I should warn the government that this is about to happen. I want to stop John Brown from making a rash decision." So he writes an anonymous letter to the Secretary of War saying, "Hey, this guy, John Brown, is about to do this thing in Harper's Ferry in Virginia. You need to be aware of it." they don't realize that this John Brown that David Gue is writing about is the same John Brown that killed all those people at the Potawatomi Massacre. So they think that he's crazy, and they're like, oh, this is just a prank letter, ha, ha, ha. This guy, David Gue, doesn't know what he's talking about. And they literally throw it in the trash, and they don't pay attention. So they actually knew about this before it happened. They just didn't take the warning seriously.